The prequel stories of Banic. One of six, The Merchant and the Thousand Forges. The merchant was a big-bellied, broad-shouldered man with a bushy greying beard and weathered, rough hands. His cart groaned under the weight of heavy axes, saws, and other tools designed for cutting saplings and tending to charcoal pits, but he hadn't managed to sell. He slammed a hammer onto the cart, the sound of metal ringing through the square. His frustration was clear. He muttered under his breath, but loud enough to make sure a few people heard him. "Bah! This town! You people don't know the value of good steel, do you? Sold half my stock for a pittance." He shook his head, muttering darkly, "And Banic's tolls will bleed me dry before I even reach the first gates." The boys, always curious, couldn't help but pause their work. They were supposed to be stacking charcoal for bundling and carting, but the merchant's loud complaints drew their attention. Ego stood up first, wiping his hands on his tunic, while Damien nudged George, whispering he's angry enough to fight his own cart. The merchant must have felt their eyes on him, because he turned to the boys, stepping away from his cart and softened his tone, as if deciding to share something worth listening to. His voice lowered conspiratorially, like he was letting them in on a secret. "You boys ever been to Banic? No? Ha! Figures. Well, let me tell you about Banic. They call it the City of 1,000 Forges, and for good reason. Every blade worth holding, every chain that anchors a ship, every nail driven into a noble's doorframe, it all comes from Banic steel, the finest in all the duchies of Mir." Damien's eyes widened. "1,000 forges?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. The merchant chuckled, stroking his beard. "Feels like 1,000 when you're there. Streets lined with smithies, sparks flying every which way. The clang of hammers never stops. Day or night, it's like music in the air. The smell of molten iron, it's thick enough to choke you, but once you get used to it, you'll never forget it." George frowned, expecting more from the famed city. "But what about the nobles and the duke? Do they live there too?" The merchant barked a laugh. "The nobles? The duke? Ha! They don't sully themselves with the forges. No, they sit in their palaces, drinking wine and laughing at the rest of us. They don't care about the sweat and blood that goes into the steel they're so proud of. And here's the kicker. You know how they keep those forges running?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "They keep your charcoal prices low, on purpose. They don't want you folks getting too rich. No, they'd rather you stay out here, breaking your backs, while they rake in the gold." Ego frowned, his jaw tightening. Damien tugged at his brother's sleeve, whispering, "Do you think they have roast spiced meat on a spit in Banic, and maybe sweet potatoes and maybe bakeries with meat pies?" The merchant pulled himself upright and smirked. "A hard-working man could make his fortune there, lads, but only if he's sharp as steel. Otherwise, Banic will chew you up and spit you out. Remember that." With that, he climbed onto his cart and rode off, leaving the boys sitting in silence. The clang of hammers and the glow of molten steel lingered in their imaginations long after he was gone.